Thank you for joining our BTRU seminar. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Andrew Fletcher, Associate Medical Director for Donor Medicine at NHS Blood and Transplant. In this session, he will explore the evolving landscape of donor health and safety and how the donor medicine and blood transfusion research unit teams support donors at every stage of their journey, not just during seasonal campaigns.
It's great to be asked to come and talk to you guys today. So hopefully this will be sort of useful and interesting. I am a simple haematologist. I don't do statistics very well. I might get clever academic work slightly wrong or twist it to my own aims as a clinician. But that's what you guys are for, to help me be informed about what I could do and have the evidence to deliver the care I need to deliver. I am an assessor for RC Path Consulting, so I do my own independent work out in hospitals or elsewhere looking at things. So I'm not just a hospital haematologist. I do like thinking about complex systems, and you'll probably see some of that as we go through. I really love red liquids, not only blood. I have an amazing love of red wine, and I'm afraid I've got one slide on wine, but I haven't got a whole presentation. I have got whole presentations on plasma patients and wine that compares those two industries, which are very similar. But you might challenge me on that.
Quick question. Sorry, I don't know if I was just listening and didn't what path you have.
That's the Royal College of Pathologists.
Oh, okay.
So it's the guys that I've had to train to be here in front of you, but they have their own consulting arm that is invited into hospitals or other organisations to look at how we are delivering pathology type care. So I apologise and please, NHSBT is terrible at acronyms. I have really struggled with acronyms coming into this organisation, but you caught me out on my first slide.
Sorry.
For being as bad.
Every organisation has them.
Yeah. So I come at transfusion from a hospital doctor point of view, which is slightly different than the diehard medical team across the rest of NHSBT sometimes, who are diehard transfusionists. They haven't been in hospitals always, but I come at transfusion and transfusion medicine from, we need to get something to a patient who is sick or to prevent them being sick. So it might be slightly different take on what's normal. And in my hospital practice, I treated and diagnosed causes of anemia. Now my big job is preventing anemia in the donor population. So it's similar, but quite different. And this is what we're all about. It's all about patient care, but also it's about you guys as donors. And so you guys as donors here, you get something out of being donors. We know that, but you are also very giving to all the patients that need our blood components. And that might be a little baby on the neonatal unit. It might be a child with sickle cell disease, a young mother who's had a very heavy bleed after having a baby. It might be a father who's got cancer. It might be red cells, it might be platelets, it could be plasma or cryoprecipitate or intravenous immunoglobulin derived from the plasma that we send over to the fractionator in Europe and in Optipharma. So we collect a whole load of different products from a single whole blood donation, but we can also then put you on an apheresis machine and collect some platelets or some plasma or even red blood cells and be a bit more targeted about what we're collecting from whom. And so I'm going to try and take you through some things that might be useful for everybody here. So here we go. I love business. I came into NHSBT from pathology service manager, where we were trying to think about an NHS pathology lab in a different way as part of a bigger system that could be used to make money and be self-sufficient. And that's how I sort of approach my NHS care now. And NHSBT is the best example of business thinking in the NHS. It's not perfect, but it's better than pretty much any other bit of the NHS I've come from. But if you think about the wine industry, we have a wine patient who's a bit of an addict, who relies on his donor base in his vineyard to give us our donor, our vines. And each vine can donate a bunch of grapes, and each bottle of wine you drink needs 6 to 10 bunches of grapes to give you a decent bottle of wine. That vineyard and those vines will be affected by the environment. We will need a team or a staff to harvest or collect that grape donation. And then it goes into the manufactory or the winery into big steel vats that look very like what we use to fractionate our plasma. And then how we store, box, bottle, and transport relies on a whole logistics pathway. And then our wine product comes back to our wine patient. And as we go through this talk, I hope I sort of cover each of these aspects of vineyard care, donor care, not so much about staff care, very little about manufacturing. That's not what I'm here for, because I'm very interested in this bit. But then how we get stuff back to patients is what I've done for my whole career. So our first challenge in the UK is that we don't recruit many donors compared to the rest of the world. And the UK, if this works, is right here in the middle. We're neither good nor bad with how many head of the population are blood donors. We've got probably just about enough to meet demand in most situations. But if you look at some of the European countries, per head of population, they are collecting more donations than we are. That might be because they've got a bigger proportion of their population being donors, or they're more efficient at collecting from the same donors that keep coming back. And it's clear that there's a lot to learn, both from what's happening in sort of first world, Europe, North America, some of the Southeast Asian countries all have a lot to teach us, but also some of the African countries that have very different attitudes to infection, like malaria, and how you can screen and test donors because they don't have the same capabilities that we do. We can learn from all of these guys. And we sort of sit sort of 2.6% of our population are blood donors, which is a little bit less than the rest of Europe. So there's something going on that means our recruitment or at a population and cultural level, we're less good at becoming blood donors than other places. So there's some work that Donor Experience, the team that are all about recruitment and retention within NHSBT are doing to try and understand how do we get new donors through the front door and recruit them, but we also need to then retain donors and keep them as we move forward. So the UK population is changing and changing very, very rapidly. People are coming into the UK and we are a small island in the north of Europe. We have a generally European heritage population, but that is changing quite quickly. The main countries of people travelling into the UK are from South Asia, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, West and East Africa, Hong Kong, an old British colony, changing hands. A lot of people have moved back to the UK to join families based here. And then with the war in Ukraine, a lot of Eastern Europeans have started moving over here, on top of all the Eastern Europeans that moved from Poland, Latvia, all that part of the world that changed through the USSR changing to our current Russia. People come here for lots of different reasons. 500,000 people come to the UK per year to study. Some come to work, some come to join families, some come because they are escaping strife or problems in their own country. And 51,000 last year people came to the UK illegally, 89% in small boats that we still see on the news every day. So our population is increasing per year quicker than it's falling. And at a genetic level, people of different heritage have different blood groups. They have different types of underlying conditions, and that might have an effect on our donor base, who can be a blood donor, but it also has a massive effect on our healthcare system. What kind of patient do we have in the hospital that needs transfusion care or general care? And so the world is just a ginormous village now. And we need to understand, and my practice in haematology, when I worked in Hull, I had 10 patients with sickle cell disease, and most of them, apart from 4 that were homegrown, were there courtesy of, at the time, Her Majesty's prison. In the northeast of England, we had 104 children at the beginning of this year, most of whom had moved into the area, but we had a lot of new patients being born in the northeast of England. So the population is changing. And the sickle cell population, or Black heritage population, traditionally had come into London and stayed in London. Some had moved across to Bristol in the southwest, a few to Birmingham and a few to Manchester. But generally, cost of living, everything is driving Black heritage families north. So even Scotland now have a hemoglobinopathy consultant. So the population is changing, and the needs of that population at a healthcare level are changing. And here we go. Most people coming into the UK are from Africa, South Asia, or Southeast Asia, so have a very different genetic makeup. This is my slide about blood groups. There are lots of blood groups now, hundreds of them. We often worry about A, B, and O and the Rh blood group, maybe the Rhd blood group, but there's more to it than that. And each different population across the world have a different proportion of blood groups. So this graph on the right-hand side, if you look at our UK population, and if you sort of concentrate on the B positive blood group, that often leads to is more common in Black heritage donors that might have the RO blood group. A small proportion of the UK population and a small proportion of the UK donor base, or England's donor base in NHSBT, have the B negative blood group. That is very much more common in the Indian and Pakistani population from South Asia, and also more common in the Black heritage and African heritage populations, especially from Nigeria. And I picked Nigeria because most of my patients in the northeast had come from Nigeria in the west of Africa for education purposes. The northeast of England universities were literally going to West Africa to tout for business and pulling business students, nursing students, and a few scientific students and computer science especially into the northeast, because that was what the universities were concentrating on. So the students would come over with their families, and that ballooned our local population. And it's the same across the whole of the UK. And thinking about the sickle cell population, who really rely on the RO blood group, as you can see, it's very different in different groups of people. Some parts of Africa, up to 50% of the local population will have the RO blood group. It's different depending on what country you're from and where your family is originated from across Africa. From Southeast Asia, very few donors have the RO blood group. We have a slightly more mixed population in the UK, but still it's just a tiny proportion. And when we think about populations, we need to think about the local population, the in-hospital population, and our donor population, and they may all be different. And that's one of the challenges we're facing in NHSBT. So this is, again, the different populations of donors having different percentage of blood groups. But this was an interesting piece of work that looked at where you are from based on your ethnic origin, and the NHS has got very clear ways of defining where we are from. And this graph compares, and I've highlighted, our Black heritage or Afro-Caribbean heritage patients and the disproportionate amount of patients that are admitted compared to the general population. So more patients in hospital proportionally come from a Black heritage population, and that is driven in some part because of patients with sickle cell disease. And in my practice over the past 10 years, hemoglobinopathy care has been the only growth industry I have seen in adult and paediatric hematology. Cancer care, the proportion of cancer patients is staying the same. We might treat them longer better more aggressively and have better outcomes. So patients with malignancies are surviving better, but the numbers of them are staying the same. Whereas the numbers of patients with hemoglobinopathies are going up. Like I said, in northeast of England, fourfold in paediatrics over a 4-year period, sixfold in adult practice. And that's leading to a massive increase in admissions. 75% of sickle cell patients are admitted in London. So most of our sickle cell disease patients still live in and around London. If you are admitted with sickle cell disease, you'll have a 3-fold increase in mortality compared to other patients without sickle cell disease. And one admission with sickle cell disease is often associated with multiple admissions, often up to 4 in a year. So it's a really complex condition, and it's probably the most complex condition that I have ever looked after as a hematologist. And these guys are in hospital a long time, and they are very expensive. Quarter of the admissions for patients with sickle cell disease occur in young people. And the patients with sickle cell disease have a reduced life expectancy, and their life expectancy on average in the UK is 47 years compared to our 70, 80 in the more general population. So it's a really challenging group of patients to look after. It's an expensive group of patients to look after, and we don't do it very well. But it's increasing, and our knowledge has to change with that increase in patients. In a short period, these guys, the Sickle Society and the NHS Race and Health Equality Observatory, try to do the clever math about how much patients with sickle cell disease cost over 2019 to 22. So 3-4 years, £100 million just for a small proportion of patients. So we need to think differently about how we look after patients with sickle cell disease. And having suitable transfusion for these patients would make a massive difference to them as a population and patient group, but also would knock on and improve the health of the nation. But also, because we switch and substitute blood groups, we aim to collect 50% of the RO blood we need. Our target is only half what we really need to treat patients out there in the real world. So if we could get more RO blood, we can reduce the need for substitutions of the other blood groups, B neg or B pos and O neg and O pos, that would free those blood groups up for other people. And so that would alleviate a lot of our blood stock shortages. So here we go. RO, I will bang on about patients with sickle cell disease and the RO blood group because I'm really passionate about this. This was an amazing group of patients to look after, a really challenging group of patients to look after, and not without risk. And one of the most amazing patients I looked after was a 12-year-old girl who had her first red cell exchange transfusion and had a reaction called hyperhemolysis syndrome to that red blood cell exchange transfusion that meant we could no longer transfuse her because she had developed new antibodies to a really rare bit of the blood group system called anti-Duffy3. So if she was given more blood, she started to hemolyze and break down that blood, and it's like pouring petrol on a fire. It fueled her being more and more poorly. And if you think our normal hemoglobin for most of us in the room is probably about 100 to 120 and or above. Her hemoglobin was below 4, and we could not transfuse her because it was making her more poorly. But she has now had a stem cell transplant with lots of medicine to protect her from breaking down red blood cells, and she's come out the other side and is surviving and hopefully cured from her sickle cell disease and the risk of the hyperhemolysis syndrome, but only with more transfusion support and more careful transfusion support. So these guys, if we can get blood right at the beginning and matched for them as individuals, we can reduce the risk to those individuals and protect them for the rest of their life. And sickle cell disease patients get sick from about 6 months of age and stay sick the rest of their life unless you can reduce the sickle hemoglobin level either with transfusions or transplant. So we need more RO blood to look after patients with sickle cell disease. Our demand for RO blood is going up very, very rapidly. An increase of 100% in a 10-year period, and that's starting to take off faster than that. If you look at how many of our Black Heritage UK or England population are RO potential donors, just under half of the Black Heritage population could be RO donors. If you translate that into donors coming through the front door of NHSBT, based on the number of Black Heritage donors that get deferred or cannot donate for all the reasons we screen a donor, 1 in 3 Black Heritage donor will have the RO blood group, compared to 1 in 100 European Heritage donor. So we need to recruit donors from the Black Heritage population to come in to support our Black Heritage sickle cell disease population. The next challenge is donors not staying with us. And this is sort of this year's sort of O negative donor base that shows over time it's falling. There's some peaks and troughs when we go out and recruit actively, but over time our donor base is falling. If you look at all donors on NHSBT's books, we have about 1.8 million people signed up that could be blood donors. We have 800,000 of those 1.8 million actually coming back and donating more than twice a year. We are deferring. So you come in through the front door, you have your donor screening, and based on something you tell us, travel, exposure to infection, or something else about your health, we defer you. Some of those deferrals will be reversible after a set period, but sometimes donors won't come back and see us. If you look at sort of low hemoglobin, which when we do your finger prick test as a donor, at the beginning of the summer, June 2025, we were deferring over 12% of donors for low hemoglobin. That has changed. That's dropped from 12.6% to 3.6% 2 weeks ago on the 17th of November, and I'll come back to that in a little while. But if we defer donors for low hemoglobin, research we've done within the donor medicine team in NHSBT show 50% of donors deferred for low hemoglobin do not come back to donate after 2 or 3 years. So if we defer a donor, they might not ever come back. So we need to retain our donors better and look after you guys as donors. So if we go from 1.8 million donors that could come in regularly, with all of that, we've actually got an active donor base that come back regularly and haven't been deferred in the past 12 months of 500,000, which is not quite enough. And that is why we keep having recurrent challenges with blood shortages. The biggest challenge, or the biggest groups that get deferred, are the very young, the guys who might become the regular good donors of the future, are Black Heritage donors and those donors with low hemoglobin. But that's changed a little bit recently. So we need to go out and recruit. So go on.
Professor, how have you analysed that against, let's say, over the last 40, 50 years, when I started at 18, fell out of the car after the first one, fortunately I wasn't driving. But how have you compared that against increased travel, diseases and everything else, to know what percentage that number is of donors from years ago, to see whether you say it's declining number, but is it actually a declining number relative to available? And is that just a data analysis thing, you just don't have it enough to know?
We don't know. As an organisation, until this year, we've not been particularly data savvy.
Right.
And it's only through 2025, with a lot of work to interrogate our very old IT system called Pulse, that has allowed us to start pulling together better demographic details of where we are and understand what we need. And this is not what people will say. We are very siloed. So the hospitals are separate to what we do. And yes, we talk to each other, but we don't get real-time information about what hospitals need with what we are collecting. Also, we have rough and ready data like this about how many donors we have and the correct numbers of donors, but it's not robust. But we are getting better, and our ability to dashboard and calculate what we're expecting from the beginning of a week to an end of a week, with donors booked in, donors coming in, collections made, deferrals made. We are getting way better at understanding and predicting what we need, when we need it, and how we can adapt what we're doing to change. But that is taking a lot of work and manual work, because we haven't got the IT infrastructure in the background to make this much easier. So it's a really interesting challenge, and I'll come back to the technology we have a couple of times as we go through things. So we need everybody's help. If you look at drivers for donors to come and see us, we still talk about the friends and family tests. If you know someone who's had a blood donation, or a family member that's had a blood donation, that is more likely to make you come and be a blood donor. The other reasons are coming in to help others, but alleviating shortages or to receive something are not high on drivers for people to come in to be blood donors. However, recent stuff from last year, 50% of countries across the globe offer something to donors, either small monetary gifts, travel expenses, or other things to sort of help donors come in to donate. The new thing that seems to be coming out and driving donors in a much stronger way is what's called double altruism. Donors, you guys come and give us a blood donation. If we can match that donation with another form of giving, either to a charity or something to pay back your giving, a health check, that might be a stronger driver to keep donors coming back in to see us. So we need to change how we think about the drivers that bring people into us or back to us as we change our technology. And again, this is where we need guys like Prof. Ferguson in Nottingham, who I think I saw join, and his team looking at the behavioural science behind donation giving and the challenges of healthcare to help inform us in NHSBT and donor experience, to help get new donors in and keep you guys as current donors going. So at the moment, we very much are go out there and drag people off the street. It's not quite that simple. There's a lot more going on than that. And we have some local targets in the southeast, in London, the southwest, and some of the other areas of the UK where we have specific donor groups. But it's a bit blunt. And we have some local targets and some donor and patient ambassadors, but we have a very different attitude to donor recruitment than the rest of Europe, where they very much are involved in recruiting new donors in hospitals, individualizing recruitment within communities, and often have community groups attached to a donor centre that seem to be very helpful. One thing we've just started investing in is donor groups, and especially groups in the southeast, in Africa, the Black heritage population, or the Muslim population. They want to come and donate in groups. So part of that is safety in numbers, and that seems to be very effective. But sometimes it relies on a lot of organisation, and some of those donors get deferred at the front door. So we have to cater for a group where some of those donors, and our Black Heritage deferral rate at the front door is 30% of Black Heritage donors cannot donate once they come in onto a session, which is a huge amount compared to less than 10% in European Heritage donors. So we have to cater for a group that we know some people in that group will not be able to donate. We've also started looking at translation services. When we do our donor screening, that is very individual and very personal to you as a donor. You may not want your mother, father, brother, sister, son or daughter, to know some of the things that you may need to disclose to make sure you are safe to be a donor, or your blood component is safe to go into a patient. So having truly independent translators on session is quite difficult, but we're trying to work through that with different heritage groups and different language groups to get that better, including guys that are deaf and use sign language. So how we use that, the NHS is better at doing that as a whole than we are with an NHSBT, but with what we're asking and how we're asking it is quite challenging, and the consent and the governance around that is causing us a few problems. If any of you have been in London recently, we've wrapped about 12 buses in London, and that is to target our Black heritage population. And the buses have managed to get various members of Parliament and the mayoral team from London in to donate just last week. So that is another way we're trying to sort of modernise how we attract donors in to see us. And then we are far better at tracking. The data is key to what we're doing. We're getting better at seeing these are the appointments we've got. How many are booked? Do we have any slots left? Can we push the messaging out or individualized messaging to specific donors that we know are what we might say is high value, with specific blood groups that will be useful for what we need there and then? So what makes donors come or not come to see us? This graph on the top right hand side is a few years ago and shows the yearly trend. And this is really interesting. When we have holidays, our new patients or new donors coming in fall. If we push out donor communications, our donor numbers go up. But it comes and goes all the way through the year. The bottom graph is National Blood Week, happens every year, and we get a massive increase in new donors signing up, but also return donors coming through, and then it returns back to our normal baseline. It would be nice if we could push the general baseline up rather than have this massive spike and then back to baseline. But that doesn't seem to happen. And some donor centres have only filled 40% of their capacity. So it's not that we don't have room for donors. We might not always have room for donors where they want that room, but it's how we adapt the system to meet this. And we know we can get more people through the front door, and that people are ready, willing and able to come. They just not have got the systems robust yet to do that. And we know the time of year affects our blood supply. The next few weeks, we're all on slightly tender hooks because we know Christmas often causes a slump in donation. Christmas shopping, it's cold outside. All these reasons reduce the number of donors coming through the front door. It happens in the summertime with school holidays, or not just summer holidays, Easter, half term, and we see all of that. And that's when we actively go out to retain and recruit donors with all the communications that go out on the media. Also, the number of other things happening in the NHS affect us. So the number of solid organ transplants. To have a new organ, a new liver or new kidneys, you might need a lot of blood products to support you through that organ transplant. So we've seen when if we have a little run of 5 or more organ transplants, suddenly the demand on the blood goes up, and we might run out, or we might start getting into the shortages and be concerned about that. At the moment, we've got the massive push across the NHS to sort out our waiting lists. Our waiting list initiatives are pushing up the surgeons' activity, so that's pushing up our use of blood. So we need to be able to respond. And again, we're not plugged into what is happening in the NHS. We always lag a bit behind what is happening. So we need to get better at having real-time data about what the NHS needs. And if you think about the wider healthcare system, we've got NHS hospitals, we've also got the private healthcare providers that are very disconnected and very much a law unto themselves. And we're trying to work better with the private sector healthcare organisations to get them doing the same strategies in the hospital that we have developed within NHS hospitals. But those links take time to develop. But we do know when we push stuff out there, we can get more donors in, and that can be at a regional, local level, right through to a national level. So who can be a blood donor? And I do like Disney movies. The NHSBT likes partnering with Disney, and it's done some really interesting things over the past year with Marvel, and it's looking at other franchises to try and support and advertise blood donation. We know that we have a minimum age of consent, and then we have a maximum age based on first-time donors coming in for the very first time or returning. We have weight limits of being above 50 kilos, but not heavier than 158 kilos. We want you to be a certain height.
The local gamer center, you can be 160 now. They were just telling me. So.
Oh, am I out of date again? So yeah, we keep adjusting these, and if you look at the population as a whole, or different population groups within our donor population, there are really clever and simple ways that we could change what we're doing to facilitate more donors coming in to give us a collection. And if you look at countries like Japan, they scale what you can donate, how much you can donate based on your size, age, and gender. So there's clever ways, simple ways that we could streamline what we're doing. And Yanning has talked to me this morning about clever ways of streaming a donor based on their expected blood volume, calculated based on your height and weight, that might allow much more personalised care. I think that's where we need to be heading with donor care. It's personalised donor care. But then there's all of the reasons that you can donate. And then on the other side, there's all the reasons why you might not be able to donate, like having a previous cancer, having certain heart conditions, being transfused at a certain point. At the moment, we're trying to change the views of the rest of Europe based on previous transfusions, which will open the door to many more donors. And we've managed to get UK plasma into Europe to be fractionated for plasma for medicines. Hopefully, over the next 12 months or so, it might be, with variant CJD being far less a risk to the population, that might let us allow many more UK people who have been transfused in the past to then donate. Also, we don't allow people with diabetes who are taking insulin donate in the UK. Most of Europe have now changed the rules on that. So maybe we need to look at that as well to facilitate more donors to come in to see us. And if you think of our aging population and the fact that more of that aging population have chronic diseases like diabetes or chronic kidney disease, being able to allow older donors to come in is really important. So I'm just going to quickly go through different challenges we face with donors at different ages. We know that the first appointment is a challenge. It takes longer. And if you look at a donor's journey through a session, if you are a new donor, a Black Heritage donor, or an RO donor, those three things are independently delay the time it takes you to get through a donor session. And the biggest group that do not come back if they've had a bad, long experience through a donor session is our Black Heritage donors. They literally vote with their feet. They have a longer journey time because they are Black Heritage donors, but they don't come back because of that longer journey time. So we need to individualise and think about how we are looking after our Black Heritage donors at that first appointment. We don't know, but we think the RO donors take longer because we want to reassure them that they are really important to our sickle cell population, and we're not meeting the demands for that group, but we need to get those donors back, so we spend a bit more time with them, and that public relations is really important to support and look after our donor base. Retaining our donors is a challenge because we can't get the right appointments in the right place at the right time, and that might be because you're a working mum and you've got to get the kids to school, but you can come in the middle of the day. Might be you're working and you can come right at the beginning of the day or after work or at weekends. And over time, it wasn't COVID, just over time we have gone from having lots of mobile sessions out in the community to be very donor-centric, donor-centric, and not having the mobile sessions that we used to. We are deferring more and more donors for more and more event reasons, travel, low hemoglobin. More donors are having adverse events. Donors are getting older and having other health problems that mean they don't come back to see us. So all of these need to be thought about as we move forward. And then there's the sort of things that you can have and that delay your donation, but mean you don't have to not come back at some point. You just need to delay coming back. But some of those donors won't ever come back. And it's trying to reassure people you can't donate today because it might not be safe for you, or it might not be safe for your component or the patient that component goes to. But please do come back. But we're not very good at that. And a good example is that if you have a low hemoglobin deferral, we might send you a letter saying, we've had a low hemoglobin deferral, come back next time. We don't tell you what to do about that low hemoglobin. You come back next time and you have another low hemoglobin deferral, and we send you the same letter. You've had a low hemoglobin deferral. We don't tell you what to do about that low hemoglobin deferral. So you come back a third time and have a third consecutive low hemoglobin deferral, and then we withdraw you saying you've got a low hemoglobin, you can't be a donor anymore. But that might be a reversible thing because you have been such a good donor all the way through your life, and suddenly we've pushed you away. And not at any stage of those 3 strikes and you're out have we said, first time, think about the iron in your diet, or come back a bit longer in time than before. The second time, could we do something about your iron, like intervene on your iron level to make and reverse that low hemoglobin? Also, we've just changed our hemoglobin testing. And any of you guys that are donors may have noticed we've gone from capillary testing to venous testing. That's because it's much more accurate, but it defers a lot less donors. When we changed the method in May, in the previous 12 months, we deferred or withdrew 1,500 donors for 3 low hemoglobin deferrals, which is quite a lot. We need to go back to some of those donors and say, please come back, because you might be able to donate with the new method, but some of them might not. And that you might be able to donate, but some of you might not, is a really hard thing to sell. And how we word that carefully to invite people back is something we're struggling with to get to work properly. So our new donors, not only do we struggle to get them through the front door, once they are through the front door, we often kick them out again before they manage to make another donation. So if you're a new donor, our current deferral rate is 6.6% for low hemoglobin, compared to a return donor where it's only 3% based on our current method of the copper sulfate test and a venous HemoQ. If you look at all other deferral reasons, that goes up to 26%, so nearly a third of new donors get deferred at the front door versus 12.2% of other donors. Our journey times are changed by being new, Black heritage, and having the RO blood group, like I've said. And you have a higher risk or rate of donor adverse events, especially Black heritage, especially vasovagals. And it may not look very much that we have less than 0.1% of our donors have a vasovagal or a faint, but that is several-fold higher if you are a new donor or haven't donated in the past 2 years and you're coming back essentially as a new donor. So we need to think about new donors in a different way than we do return donors. The same with young donors. And I apologize for that I'm a bit flippant about this. I have done a lot of work with teenagers and young adults with cancer, and they are a very specific, very challenging, very interesting group of patients to look after. They have very specific needs. And our young donors also have very specific needs. And attitudes to drugs, sex, and what I call rock and roll, piercings and tattoos, all of which affect you as an individual, your blood component, and your ability to donate, and when you might be referred, are really interesting. And so my view is that actually our young donors need to be recruited really carefully. We need better education in schools. And I used to go into my daughter's school and do Key Stage 2, final year of junior school. They have a whole topic called blood cells. they weren't really bothered about red blood cells, but you could tell the kids, go and tell mummy and daddy that actually could they be blood donors, and they might save someone's life. So it's slightly emotive, but kids are really good at blackmail, I've noticed with the 3 of mine. So it can work, it could work. Our young donors have more donor adverse events, and again, looking at the vasovagal faints, the 17 to 18-year-olds, 19 to 22-year-olds have a much higher rate of vasovagals. So young donors are different to older donors. And maybe if we can start the seed of being a blood donor early and sow that, and so when they get to be 17, maybe they come back maybe once a year, so we get them in the system. And when they've got through their drug, sex and rock and roll era, and their lives have stabilized, and they have got their own family or have seen friends and family that might need a transfusion, they might be the future regular donors. And I think we need to look at that as these young people as a group of donors and look after them in a different way. If you look at all donors, this is sort of data that we looked at through the summer, and this is sort of the number of deferrals up to in the 12 months leading to July 2025. So 1%, 1.6% of donors were deferred because of travel reasons, but that is more than doubled if you are a Black Heritage donor. And that's because if you're a Black Heritage donor, you travel to a malaria endemic area to see friends and family. Common sense. Our Black Heritage or African and Caribbean blood services have a very different way of testing and a very different attitudes to malaria than we do. We are just looking at how we test for malaria and trying to understand, is there a better way to test, not just to see if you may have been exposed to malaria, that doesn't tell us whether you have active malaria or not, to a DNA or PCR based malaria test to see, have you got any malaria DNA in you, therefore you are a risk to a patient, and if you haven't, you could be a donor. So we're changing that. So hopefully our attitude to malaria will change over the next 12 months, as long as that test is sensitive and safe to be put into clinical practice and does not cause any risk to patients, because malaria can still kill patients if it's transmitted in a blood transfusion. So if we think about infection rather than just malaria, our European heritage donors are more likely to get exposed to different infections, be it HIV, hepatitis, other communicable diseases, leading to a deferral. And then our low hemoglobin deferrals were 59% up to this summer, or 50% of deferral. So our low hemoglobin deferrals this summer finally overtook all other deferral reasons put together. So we've, as an organisation, felt we had to turn that around, and we changed the hemoglobin testing. If you're an older donor, more than 55, the number of deferrals in this age group are infection or contact to an infection, medical conditions, which would not be a surprise. As you get older, you get more chronic disease, and then falling hemoglobin. That might be because you have been a regular blood donor for many years. It might be because you have another condition in the background, a chronic disease that gives you anemia of chronic disease, where your body hides away iron, so you don't use it as well, and you don't make as many red blood cells. Also, our hemoglobins fall as we get older, just as part of normal getting older, which is interesting. So there might be some work there to do to think about hemoglobin thresholds for donation or normal ranges within normal populations. And there's an increasing body of evidence for hospital care that says you should change your normal hemoglobin range based on your gender and your age when you have that blood test. And there's no reason why we couldn't think about doing that in an NHSBT for our hemoglobin thresholds. And I'll come back to hemoglobin because I'm a sad hematologist in a minute and I'm running out of time. Also, as you get older, there's the healthy donor effect, which is sort of selection bias of being a blood donor, but you do seem to have improved self-perceived health. But there seems to be something about being a blood donor that gives you an advantage over people who aren't a blood donor. And we need to unpick that a little bit better. Is it the good old bloodletting and leeches that were used in olden days to make you healthy, or is it something much more complicated? We know that weather has effects on my vineyard, but it also has effects on donors. Hot weather increases our plasma volume because so we sweat more. That dilutes our hemoglobin and we get more low hemoglobin deferrals in the summer. We get more donor adverse events when it's hot and the vasovagals and faints. We all go on holiday in the summer, so we get reduced fill rates. And because we come back from a holiday that may be somewhere where malaria is endemic, we can't then donate and we can't get the appointments. In the cold, the opposite happens. We vasodilate, so our capillary testing is not very useful. That was one of the reasons why we changed capillary testing to venous testing. And don't stay at home when it's cold and wet. Fatty foods and your diet also affect you. So fatty foods in plasma is bad, and you get cloudy plasma that we chuck in the bin. But it also can affect red blood cell and whole blood donations. And your diet, if you're a vegetarian or vegan, or you are dieting, you may not have the iron intake that you need to maintain your blood cells. And if you are doing lots of exercise and bulking out, your muscle mass increases. Where do we get a big supply of iron? In steak, which is muscle. So as you increase your muscle bulk through exercise, you don't have the free iron lying around. And children, as they grow, often struggle to maintain their iron and become anemic because of that growth and increase in muscle mass. And you can see that in adults as well. Black heritage donors were talked about. I covered all of this and other things. They have a higher frequency of thalassemia and other red cell conditions like G6PD, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency, and enzyme in the red blood cell. And often that goes along with hemoglobinopathies like sickle cell disease. So you get a double whammy of a hemoglobin problem and a red cell enzyme problem, both of which that drop your hemoglobin. You're fine and normal and completely asymptomatic, but maybe a black heritage hemoglobin threshold could be lower than someone from Europe. Also, diets are different in different populations, so iron deficiency may be more of a challenge. And in black heritage donors, chronic disease, diabetes and chronic kidney disease are more common. And then we've mentioned the travel with families. Just an interesting thing that has been very topical over the summer. We have a small and very dedicated transgender donor base. It's quite small, but it's a very complicated process to go from being male or female to the other gender. And that journey changes your physiology. With transgender donors, we need to think of where you have started from. Your genetics define your blood and how the hematology works, your immune system, your cardiovascular system, which defines your total blood volume, and your musculoskeletal system. It also affects how you might be iron deficient because you may have had periods, you may have had children. Also, your risk of other medical conditions that can lower your hemoglobin are different if you were sex assigned at birth female compared to male. These things then can affect your blood component donation, your safety to donate. Your hemoglobin thresholds are different if you're male or female, and if you are changing between one or the other based on your hormones, your estrogens, your testosterone, other drugs that affect your muscle mass, like spirolactone. But you still remain, in some ways, biologically what you were born as, your sex assigned at birth. So it may not be safe to donate. Also, if you have had a pregnancy as a sex assigned at birth female, transitioning to a transgender male, even though you may have changed physically and hormonally, your antibodies generated from that pregnancy might put a patient at risk. And so we have to think about transgender donors, about them, their blood component, and their patient safety. And that is really complicated. And we can only do that if we personalize their care. And this whole journey needs to be taken into consideration. At the moment, we have a very blunt, what is your sex assigned at birth? And that defines what we do with your blood component. It doesn't look at this whole journey, and we are in the process of changing that, which is really, really complicated. So here is my simple model of anemia that I have slowly put together over many years as a hematologist. But all of these things affect the hemoglobin in your red blood cells, including your blood groups. So your blood groups define your optimum level of hemoglobin. The hormones you're on, the alcohol I'm drinking, the drugs you're on, whether you're abusing EPO like Lance Armstrong, gynecological conditions, fibroids in your uterus can make EPO or other hormones that can affect your hemoglobin. Your chronic disease not only gives you anemia of chronic disease, but it may make you bleed. There's a condition called epidermolysis bullosa where you don't connect the levels of your skin together and it falls off and you lose iron in your skin. Every time we cry, we lose iron in our tears. So hemoglobin and optimizing that hemoglobin for a patient is where I originally started this, but it's no different for blood donors. And some of these are genetically determined. Some of them we can measure, and we can probably start combining all these together to personalize someone's care and thoughts about it, especially how your body deals with iron. And if you hold on to iron with something called hemochromatosis, if you have a high ferritin level, a high iron level, we let you donate every 6 weeks. So we get that iron level down to protect you. So if we knew that a donor had hemochromatosis and holds on to iron that protects them from low hemoglobin or anemia, they would be a super donor. If you're a big bloke with hemochromatosis, that you can be a super donor because you can donate more. So we can start personalizing all the different things about you to make you a super donor, or protect you because we just want you to come back every so often, or there's something else about you that we can change. So here, sort of, if you throw everything together about hemoglobin, monogenic disorders like thalassemia, sickle cell disease, hemoglobinopathies, all the polygenic variation about how you make red cells, your iron metabolism, I apologize for going over time, your red blood cell stability, all of these things are genetically determined and can be put into clever polygenic scores. We can then add in your physiological factors, who you are, where you come from. Look at environmental factors. Do you smoke? Do you live at high altitude? Do you have obstructive sleep apnea, all of which might push your hemoglobin up? Do you like alcohol, like me, or smoke? And then you can measure things like your blood count, your iron status, your ferritin, B12 and folate, and put all of this together into something that will predict and help us look after you as an individual. This is just some evidence about polygenic scores. It's sort of, I would like to say we're nearly there to be able to start introducing these into what we do prospectively, but we probably need to come up with a clever way of building them into what we're doing, but we're not quite there yet. So I'm going to gloss over that. I apologize. Hemoglobin and iron levels. This is a horrible, complicated slide, but these are the different levels of hemoglobin that are considered safe or unsafe in red, be it high when you're polycythemic and making too many blood cells, or low and you should not be donating. And as you can see, the thresholds for different things, be it donating or not donating, or what is safe for pregnant or non-pregnant women or men, or thresholds for transfusion in a hospital, are all different, just to confuse everybody all the time, including me as a hematologist. But our donation thresholds are all different all over the world. And there's not a lot of agreement. And different places reduce the thresholds, but monitor you more carefully, or let you donate less frequently. So there's lots of ways just on hemoglobin we could change what we're doing and how we look after you all as donors. What I thought was really interesting from the WHO is they let you be a plasma donor with a hemoglobin of 60, which I think is quite brave. And I can't imagine that Emanuele or Charlotte would let me do that for the plasma donors, but it's definitely something to think about, just to wind Charlotte up if nothing else. So Charlotte's my colleague in donor medicine, who's our Deputy Chief Medical Officer. So I'm looking forward to having that conversation with her. So this is our current hemoglobin testing. So copper sulfate, it's very useful and effective. It's over 100 years old technology based on specific gravity of different liquids falling through a different liquid. And it was introduced to check hemoglobin in the 1940s, but we're still using it as our frontline first test in 2025. We follow that with now a venous HemoQ sample, because that is more accurate than a capillary sample, and that's been in use since the 1980s, and it looks at the colour of your red blood cells when you burst them on the little cuvette that we put it into the machine. Or we can do an analyzer test. An analyzer test can look at your hemoglobin, other things about your red blood cells, your more general health, and there's some really clever analyzers out there now that can look at your iron status in varying levels of degrees. And I think we're at the point now we can start moving forward with how we do this testing. This is the story of our low hemoglobin deferrals. Before 2018, we had a decent low hemoglobin deferral rate. We changed the method of the copper sulfate and the HemoQ multiple times without any checks or data built in to monitor what we were doing. And our hemoglobin deferrals went from 2 to 4% up to 12.6% at the worst week, which is pretty bad. But looking back and understanding that as a complex system, there were good reasons why we did it, about efficiency, kindness to staff, kindness to donors, but we didn't check it and monitor what we were doing. And this is what we did. This is the past couple of years. And then when we intervened with our new hemoglobin test, and as you can see, our low hemoglobin deferrals have massively reversed back to the levels we had before 2018. Our other deferral rates have come down because of the low hemoglobin, but generally our deferral rates are creeping up in the background independently to the low hemoglobin rates. And we don't seem to have had an increase in donor adverse events with vasovagals, other problems, because of this additional or change in testing.
Is that the testing that happens after a donation now? That was
So no, that's called post-donation testing. So this is our front door, first lines of copper sulfate, followed by, if you fail the copper sulfate test, we will do a venous test, and that's caused this change.
okay.
So that's a really good question. So this is what we call post-donation testing. So you come in, your first donation in this process, you will have the normal copper sulfate venous HemoQ test. If you can donate, depending on your hemoglobin, you'll either be fine over threshold to donate, and then you can come back in 12 weeks if you're a man, 16 weeks if you're a woman, and do the same again. And based on your hemoglobin level, if it's really good, you don't need to have your front door testing. So it makes that journey quicker for you as a donor. It makes the team more efficient for the donor team, so they can be concentrating on doing other things better. If your hemoglobin is low, under threshold, you will get deferred, and depending on how low, your hemoglobin will define what happens next. We're trialling this on 3 teams with the aim to roll it out across the rest of the organisation.
Just wondering how many
Yeah.
slides we have, and whether people who might have meetings or other commitments need to go, or
Yeah.
what do you think? Is there
There's probably about 5.
5? Up to people, any people are going ahead? Yeah. Great, lovely.
Thank you. Sorry. If you then combine that, this should be a springboard to whatever we do next. And if we combine this with some really clever data from the guys here in Cambridge with about iron levels based on your blood count sample that we can take off when we do your post-donation testing, it can give us data about your iron status, and then we can start personalising how we look after you. So as you can see, based on the interval trial, which is a little bit old now, but still very useful, and what we are using to define lots of things we did or do, you are either fine for your iron, slightly low or iron depleted, or iron deficient, or your hemoglobin is low, and that can change how we look after you. If we start adding all of this together, we can start personalising people's care much better. And then we can start adding in, if you are fine, you don't need anything done about it. You're fine, carry on. But maybe high-risk individuals, young women, those who have just had babies, might benefit from having their iron topped up for a short period. If your iron level is low, in my view as a haematologist, if you leave that long enough, you will become anemic and your hemoglobin will start falling. So maybe intervening early is better, but we've always got to balance risk and benefit. Extra treatment might have side effects. There's some concern that iron supplementation might put you at risk of bowel cancer. I'm less convinced about that, but it's something to think about. If you are iron deficient or your hemoglobin is low and you are iron deficient, we definitely need some sort of supplementation to protect you from all the side effects of iron deficiency and anemia that are similar but different. So we need to come up with a good plan about how we do this, both as a clinical trial to gain evidence, but also as a way to work in hospitals. And we can do that following the post-donation testing plan, using clever full blood count data, something about your iron, maybe using some genetic stuff, and also looking at something called hepcidin, which is the hormone that controls how your body deals with iron. And that's the thing that the hemochromatosis mutations change, so you're better at holding on to iron. So there's options and opportunities here to try and tie in all the things that we're doing, both here in the BTRU and in NHSBT. So I've just sort of said that we can be, and I think we should have front door testing to see how you are right here, right now, most visits, and a single assessment of where you are at a genetic point of view. And then that will define how we advise you to manage your iron and your deferral. And then it will also let us switch you between different blood components. And this is a big thing that we've started to work on over the past few weeks. So switching, or the donor journey optimization strategy, is basically if you have your blood donor, a brand new blood donor could be switched, like my scare electric track, to different components based on my blood count, my blood group, my iron status, my genetics, or my diet. And it might be that actually there's something about me. I really like pizza and I really like alcohol. I should not be a plasma donor. Or I've got hemochromatosis and I'm slightly overweight white male. I would be a perfect red cell donor. It also is about how we change you from whole blood donation into an apheresis donation service for plasma, platelets, or even red blood cells by apheresis. And red blood cells for apheresis, if you think of donors that come in regularly once a year, well, what's the point? Actually, if those donors could be put onto an apheresis red cell machine, we could get 2 collections from them. So we would get buy one, get one free from that one donor, but they keep coming once a year. That protects them, but doubles the donations that they can offer. So all of this is about donor health optimization, which is where I think we need to be going as a donation service. It might be we should be thinking about health screening as a payback for you guys that are donors, doing simple things like height and weight, your blood pressure, your diabetes test. We do a lot of diabetes tests. All our Black Heritage donors have an HbA1c as a side effect of checking if they have sickle cell disease or not. But we ignore the result. It's just something that gets generated. We push it to one side and say, that doesn't matter about how we look after those donors in the future. But actually, it's a really useful tool to protect someone from a reversible condition, their cholesterol levels or their PSA. And a funny, well, not a funny story, a sad story. Sanguine have just been told by the government in the Netherlands to stop doing their HbA1c testing and cholesterol test on donors because it disadvantages non-donors. And the Netherlands government have said, unless they can come up with a way to roll that out for the general population, they should stop doing that. And we've been asked to consider carefully what tests we are doing here in the UK on our donors at the moment, as of the beginning of last week. So some of the tests we're doing, how do we deal with that? And the ethics of this are really interesting. From a population health point of view, if we start with the donor population, that will help the general population. And if the general population see there's benefit of becoming blood donors, in my simple terms, I think that might help pull in new donors. And if we can get the number of appointments and the right appointments in the right place, we can then start the streaming strategy to optimize all of this. It's
that I can understand the sort of ethical side of that, but surely the positive side of it, in addition to what you just said, is now identifying people with issues rather than letting them go and spend more money on whatever, and perhaps will allow GPs and others to prioritise the people who aren't donors for whatever reason. well.
Yeah, no, most people are completely with you and are horrified by this, but it's all about cost and benefit and not putting people at a disadvantage.
I work for a Dutch guy, and if I told him that, he would go, my government's crazy. So they've gone completely.
So the way to solve this is tie us into the NHS IT system.
One of the principles.
Yeah.
So there's clearly isn't. But that's the issue.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I agree with the screening committee's guidelines, but this is always a bit of a struggle with thinking about population based and not everything.
Those people can become rapid.
It's not equitable.
Equitable. Anyone thinks that.
So yeah, we
go provide.
yeah, no, I agree.
I don't think we've time to go.
No.
I agree. It's an interesting. This is where we are as blood operators and the challenges we face with local and international law. And I didn't even put anything about our 20-year-old law that we follow in the UK. So my vision as a hospital haematologist that's become a blood donor consultant is that we need to tie all this together. We need to know what's going on with you guys as donors. We need to know what's happening with patients. I really need to know what you guys are doing here in the BTIU, because you're doing amazing work that is starting to inform what might be possible and what we can do on the shop floor in NHSBT. And I think being here, working with you guys, talking to you guys and seeing what's happening is the best way forward. And these are the projects that are being delivered or have been delivered that are shaping our transfusion future in the UK, but also across the world. And we should be using what we're doing to springboard from the sort of the middle of the group to the front of the class with how we look after donors. And going back to my cycle, I know as a blood donor, the weather, hot or cold, affects me, but I can be a really useful blood donor, even if it's just once a year. I could donate red cells or plasma. There is a dedicated team. They work really hard, the session teams, sometimes under a huge amount of pressure, especially if they are sick and short-staffed. It is a bit like the wine industry, especially our fractionator in Optipharma, who uses big steel vats to fractionate our plasma into medicines, just like the winery, just like the distillery up in Scotland. Our lab staff, the back of house guys who manufacture and send out all our bloods, the logistics guys that send the blood to the patients that need it, that are the friends and family of the next generation of donors. And this life cycle is what we need to be cashing in on and developing. And then just a quick quote from a book I'm reading at the moment. I like my science fiction. We can't stop progress, but we can manage it better. Elliot Modessa is a North American author, but he's very, very good at writing science fiction and has amazing insights onto health, population and complex systems. So I really like him. And that's the little Newcastle blood van that goes around the 2 hospitals in Newcastle from where my office is, which is the next block over. So I apologise for going over by 15 minutes. I hope that was interesting and useful. And thank you for your attention.
Into Andy, is a synopsis of what you'd like to say is that currently blood donors are dealt very blunt in a very blunt way.
Yeah, so it's one
That
times 50.
Everybody's wish is that they are dealt with in a more personalised way, and then the only question is how personalised is it?
I think we have huge opportunity now with the post-donation testing for you guys as donors that will give us a number of your hemoglobin, more information about you that we can then add to about things like your iron status. That immediately starts personalising whether you can donate there on the day. If you can't, when do you come back? But also what happens at your next visit? as an individual. So that is our first step to caring for you all as individuals.
To what extent do you think that the service is wedded to that? And do you see any differences from the blood donor viewpoint?
The service is definitely wedded to it, and one of the things I've been tasked with is how do we roll this plan out nationally that will let us have a springboard into other testing and take us back into 2025 rather than 1940s hemoglobin testing. I think we have that opportunity. I also know as the guy that gets to have his name on the letters that come out to you guys as donors, the letters are not useful. As a haematologist, when I was looking at patients' results, you could give advice about that individual patient in a better way. And we can do that, for example, a haemoglobin deferral letter. It shouldn't be your haemoglobin's low, come back next time, we'll see if it's not low anymore. It's your haemoglobin's low, but here's some resources that might help your haemoglobin come up so you can donate next time. There's lots of things we can do to improve how we are personal with you and interact with you. I hope those things would improve your experience as a donor, and the donor experience team have got some data that suggests it will be. The behavioural medicine guys in Nottingham will also help define some of that to say we are doing the right thing by asking you guys and not just saying, well, that feels like a jolly good idea from us in our ivory tower of NHSBT. We need to get you guys involved. And one thing I've noticed coming into NHSBT, we're not very good at asking our clients or like you or customers, you guys as donors, the hospitals, we are a little bit siloed.
I was on the interval study and was randomly assigned 8 weeks, which was great.
Yep.
I was quite happy doing that. But not seeing, you refer to it as being quite old now, but I haven't gone looking for it. But that's the first bit of the statement. But the follow up is the cost benefit analysis of some of the things that you're doing, which I think is great. But equally, if we're low in numbers, would some of the funds be better used to get all the streaming platforms, for example, to put stuff out and get the government? I mean, I remember as a kid, there used to be ads on the telly that weren't commercials, and really bang the stuff out there to increase the number of people coming through the door, the frequency. Because at the minute, I try and go every 12 or 13 weeks. The only way I can do it is to go to a donor centre, because the mobile ones come around for the frequency of 17 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I'm going on Thursday. But I can't think, I'd go every 8 weeks if I could. And I've not been told that there was a problem. Are we at a stage where we can somehow, yes, the medical side I think is really important, in terms of that journey, but for now, if we're low in numbers, there's some simple things that we do, like it allow people to go and donate more frequently than the current, because they can, etc.
So this whole process is really complicated. We have what we call the BSQR, which is the law. The UK law is 20 years old and based on law from before 2005. We then have the arm's length of the law, which is called JPAC, or the Scientific Advisory Committee for the Care and Selection of Donors, which write our guidelines for the UK. So if it's in law, it's difficult to break the law. People don't like us breaking the law. The guidelines are very conservatively written. And so to reduce the donation interval, there are about 10 mitigating factors that a blood organisation must deliver before we can change a donation interval.
But I was allowed to continue for another 2 years because the study hadn't finished. I'd done my 2 years, so I went for 4 years.
Exactly.
Or whatever it was, because the study was on. That seemed a bit crazy to me to have one to bend the rule because something else is going on. And that was, when did it finish? 6, 7 years ago?
Yeah, 16.
So you're right. So technology in NHSBT hasn't kept up with making sure we can keep you safe. And the concern is if you were to continue donating every 8 weeks, you'd start having low hemoglobin deferrals, and that might put you at risk of other symptoms. And as you're getting older, that might compound.
I'm going to, sorry, have to stop it manually.
Yeah, sure.
Hopefully take questions. Have a question, and there's one question online, and then I think we're going to have to. That's okay. Yeah.
Thanks, Andy. Very, very interesting. I think a question and a comment. One is that I think it's great to see
how we can move from somewhat personalized transfusion service, which is already personalized based on, genders, different person to actually much more personalized structure. But what is the evidence we need to be there? What is the type of strategy we can do?
Yeah.
And the other aspect that maybe the other comments that great to see as well the screening, things about the screening. When I joined in 2012 NHSBT, that was one of my initial proposals. I think it's still not to get there. And how do we move in that direction? I think there are some important elements to think about in the context as well of NHS health check and how we actually move NHSBT from an organization that can only collect blood to an organization can provide advice, it can provide medicine. So I think that's sort of
so I think good evidence. I think sort of taking what has been done in the medical evidence, like that Sanguine have just published the Forte trial showing that low dose and intermediate dose iron replacement, alternate days or daily, is very effective. We should build on that, saying, okay, we need something across NHSBT that randomizes donors to give us that statistical robustness that people will believe, but add something to it using the testing, different testing, the rich CBC data from Nick, something else that is different to what other people are doing, that is more cost efficient. And we're challenged in the NHS with funding, and we are held back now because of funding. Any changes I've been I suggest, I've been told that I can introduce it in a cost neutral way without spending any money. And okay, I need analyzers, I need staff to run the analyzers, and I need consumables, so I need money. And so who do I want to get rid of? I've got a list, but I'm not going to that right now. But there are huge opportunities, and I think, but I think we need to combine the solid research with using our donor base as the population of study. And it may be we go for a numbers game rather than a small statistical significant game, but how we balance that up it needs the informatics and the IT systems in the background. So we do need to invest in what we can do to deliver all these things that would allow us to personalize stuff. But we need to balance it up, and we need to know what you can do here with what we can do in NHSBT and marry all of that together really carefully. And the population stuff for me is a no-brainer, and we need to get into NHSE and Public Health England.
Hi, we have a question from Kevin Knowles online. People online have to type in the chats. He's wondering about the lower hemoglobin limit for men is 135 grams per litre. Why is it so? Could it be hypertrophy? Why? And also for platelets.
So we have different thresholds for different components based on the risk of you becoming iron deficient or anemic. When you give a blood donation, you can drop your hemoglobin up to 20 grams per litre. So we've set our thresholds high enough that you will not get anywhere near a level that would make you symptomatic. Women generally have lower hemoglobin than men based on having periods and childbirth that puts them more at risk of iron deficiency anemia. That is the only reason men and women are different. You could artificially say that actually we are doing a disservice to women by giving them a lower threshold, because physiologically we are actually all the same. As a hematologist, I struggle with that, but it's historical how that has evolved. There is not great evidence for that, but we can, if you look at what might be possible. We are just entering what I hope into consultation with NHS England and the MHRA about reducing the transfusion thresholds a little bit, that will support our Black heritage donors, but also everybody else. And rather than selling this as a Black heritage ethnicity thing, we would like to sell it as an everybody thing, because this might benefit everybody. If we have post-donation testing and good iron status assessment, that can personalise thresholds and interval and look after you in a much better way.